Hi and welcome back. In the last video we finished our overview of CSS and we're now ready to begin to work on our main project and set up the CSS for it. So we've moved on to the third phase in our design. And I'm going to go ahead here and just delete this test page. And I'm also going to go into my style sheet right here and delete all those styles that we worked with in the last exercise. And then I'm going to open up main.html and you can see here's where we left off. Now, when you're beginning to lay out a page with CSS, you can go ahead and type in all the basic CSS that you need. But what most designers end up doing is they have a starter style sheet that has a set of default styles that it usually includes a reset and a set of ID or container styles that match your IDs in that you normally use in your HTML. And I have one of those starter style sheets in my framework, and we're going to go ahead and use that. If you don't have my framework, you can go ahead and look up starter style sheet or foundation style sheet or foundation CSS in Google, and you can find some other examples of starter style sheets. Or you can go ahead and use mine. If you haven't downloaded the framework, you can go ahead and just type in the information as you've done with the HTML and the some of the other items. So I'm going to go ahead and minimize Expression Web here, and you can see I'm back on my desktop. And there's my framework folder. I'm going to go ahead and go into that, and then go into my main framework folder. And I'm not going to go into HTML, that's where we've gone before. I'm going to go into CSS. And my basic CSS style sheet that I use to begin all of my projects is right here. And I'm going to right click on that and select Edit with Microsoft Expression Web. And you're going to see that basic CSS comes up here. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to do Select All to select all of the styles here. And then I'm going to go ahead and copy that. And I'm going to come into my main style sheet and I'm going to paste that in. And so there's all the styles that we're going to need for this project. And obviously we're going to customize this, but this will give us a good starting point. Now a couple of notes here as I scroll through this so that you can type this information in if you haven't downloaded it. Again, I mentioned that every CSS style sheet should begin with a reset, and you can see my reset here. You can also see that I've called that out with this comment right here. As we scroll down, you'll see all the styles here. You can see I'm again using comments to go ahead and divide up my style sheet and keep it organized. And that's going to be very, very important for you. I have a text elements section here to format all my text elements, a set of default styles for that. Images, I don't have any default styles there, but I have room to add them. Some list styles, some table stylings here, some miscellaneous styles, and then a section for containers. And this is where all of my ID styles are contained. And again, the nice thing about having sort of a basic HTML and basic CSS that you always start your projects from is your IDs are always going to be the same. And they're always going to match up. So you don't have to ever wonder, okay, what did I call that outermost container? Well, you called it wrapper. What did I call the banner div? Well, I called it banner. What did I call my content area or whatever? So these are always going to be the same here. You also have some box styles here, and we're not going to use those. And I come down here and I've got a section for forms, and this is going to come in helpful when we add our form to our contact page. And then I have some miscellaneous styles right here. And then I have got some additional miscellaneous styles down here at the bottom. And that's all there is to this style sheet. Now, you should definitely get or type this style sheet in and save it and put it away and use it as much as you want. But the first thing you're going to do when you're starting a project is probably delete the areas of the style sheet that you know you're not going to use. And that's just to keep it smaller and easier to work with. It doesn't hurt to leave everything in there, but I usually come along and delete some styles that I'm not going to use. And specifically, I usually leave everything up at the top of this. But this miscellaneous section, unless you're using in your own projects any of these HTML tags, you can go ahead and delete that section. You can also go ahead and when we come down here to miscellaneous, I'm going to go ahead and delete all of that as well, because I'm not going to use any of these styles in this project. And the same thing goes for this section down here. I can go ahead and delete that as well. Again, if you're not sure if you're going to use them, leave them in there. It doesn't hurt to leave them in there at all, but if you know you're not going to use any of those styles, you can go ahead and delete those. So now I've got a little bit smaller, a little bit more compact style sheet to work with. And when we look at our main.html here, you're not going to see any differences right now. When I come in here to the code for this page and look up here in the head section, you'll see there's no link to that style sheet. So we need to go ahead and add that next. So in my HTML, I'm going to go ahead and use the link tag. And you'll remember there are 4 different attributes that we need to use with link. The first is href to indicate the location of your style sheet. And again, I use that pick URL feature to put that in there. I could have typed it in, but especially at the beginning when you're learning, that's a really helpful item to have. We have the relationship, or I should say a really useful tool to use. And the relationship is going to be style sheet. The type attribute will be text/CSS. And the media attribute, the value will be screen. Oops. And then I go ahead and, I need to get my quotation mark in there. I'll get it eventually. And then I close my bracket. And remember, this tag here, you don't actually need the slash or closing tag. You just close that off in that way. So in that way, link is a little bit different than everything else. And now let's go ahead and look at this in design view, and you can see there are a number of changes here, especially to the text on the page, as well as it's removed all the margin space from around everything. So this is exactly where we want to begin setting up and laying out our CSS. Now, the first thing that I want to do is I want to format this top section here that includes both the logo and the social media icons here. So first thing, and also the top section overall. So I'm going to come into my CSS styles and scroll down until I find the container section. And this is where we're going to work a lot. Now, before we can do the top, we need to do the wrapper. And looking at our design, you can see that this overall design has been constrained into a particular width. In this case, it's 900 pixels, and you can tell that because our graphic here is 900 pixels wide. And it's centered on the page. So I'm going to go ahead, and you can also see we have some gray in the background area there. So I'm going to go ahead, and in my wrapper, I'm going to go ahead and specify the width as 900 pixels, and I'm going to specify the margin as being 0 pixels top and bottom and auto left and right so that it centers that. We'll save that and take a look at our HTML. It might help if I collapse this here. And you can see this has now been centered on the page. Now I also want to make the background of my page gray, but the background of my wrapper area needs to be white. So to set the background color for your page, you're going to scroll up and you'll see the global section here. Inside of body, we're going to go ahead and do background color, and I'm going to select a light gray. And I know what a light gray is. It's 6Es. Whenever you have all the same value here, if it's 0, 0, if it's all zeros, that's black. If it's all Fs, that's white. If it's all the same letter somewhere in between, that's a gray color. Whether it's all Cs or all 3s, doesn't matter. E, or 6Es, is a very light gray. And you can see that light gray has been applied there. Actually, I got one too many E's in there, and it didn't apply it. So I need to take that extra E out of there, and now I have a light gray on my background. And then we need to scroll down here to our containers, and I need to set the background color of the wrapper, or this container right here, to being white. So I'm going to specify the background color as FF, FF, FF. That's all white. And so now you can see gray background, white wrapper area. So the next thing which we'll do is we're going to format this top div right here. Now formatting this top area up here is going to be one of the more involved parts of the CSS in this lesson. It's not going to be involved or more complicated because there's going to be anything really new. It's just going to be that before we can really see the end result, we need all the pieces to fit together. So if it seems like things aren't coming together at first, don't worry about that. It will in the end. So let's go ahead and jump back in here to our style sheet. And I actually want to go ahead and create a couple more styles here. One for the logo div. And I just tabbed those over because I like everything to be nice and neat and lined up, so it's more readable. And believe me, once you've worked with CSS or HTML a little bit, or any kind of coding for a while, you'll see the real importance of keeping everything very readable and very organized. It'll save you a lot of time in the end. Now let's go ahead and look at our finished item here. You can see our top div here. Obviously it's filled in with black, so we need to change the background color. We also want to put a little bit of padding on this, and we're going to actually try a border on the bottom of this div to differentiate the top nav from this area, and you'll see if you like that a little bit later on. And then we're going to go ahead and format the logo right here, as well as the social media icon. One final thing that isn't obvious from looking at this is we need to specify that this top banner should take up 100% of the available width of the wrapper div. So we need to also specify the width. So let's go ahead and come back in here to our style sheet, and I'm going to go ahead and say background dash color is going to be black. And remember, black is all zeros, white is all Fs. And then I want to go ahead and specify the width so that this div takes up 100% of the available parent container, which in this case is the wrapper. Now I could have accomplished that exact same thing by specifying the width as being 900 pixels. The problem with that is that if I could do that for a whole bunch of divs and then I decide to change the width of my design, let's say because I want to use some different images here that are wider, I would have to go make that change everywhere that I reference this 900 pixel value. But if I specify this as 100%, regardless of what I change this to, this will always expand to fill 100% of the available space. So we specified the background color and we also specified the width. I want to give myself a little bit of padding top and bottom. So we'll give it 20 pixels and 0 pixels of padding left and right. And actually we'll look at that border a little bit later. So we'll leave that off for right now. Final property that we need to go ahead and put in here that we haven't worked with before is actually the overflow property. And since this div contains some other divs that we're floating around and positioning, we need to add this property. And it's going to be overflow hidden. And don't worry exactly what overflow does right now. Just go ahead and add that property and we'll talk more about that in a later video. And so now that we have these properties put in here, let's go ahead and take a look and we can see what we've got now for the top div. Now the next thing I want to go ahead and do is I want to push the Fullerton logo over a little bit from the left. I want to leave the top and the bottom alone, but I need to move that over just a little bit. So I'm going to go ahead and specify some left-hand margin for my logo. So I'm going to go ahead and do margin 0, 0, 0, and then let's say 10 pixels. And that's going to give me 0 margin, top, right, and bottom, but 10 pixels on the logo to the left. We'll save that, and sure enough, it bumped that over just a little tiny bit for us. Now, the next thing that I want to go ahead and do is I want to go ahead and set up our social media icons right here and our menu. So let's go ahead and take a look at our finished design here. And obviously you can see the position is different, but there's a few other things. The font color for my paragraphs has been made white. This formatting here is actually from Skype. We won't have that in our actual design, but if you install Skype on your computer, it will appear this way. The icons are also smaller, and there's a little bit of spacing that's been placed in here. So let's go ahead and come back into our style sheet. And the first thing that I want to go ahead and do is I want to get that text appearing in here. And again, when we look at the code here, we can see that we can specifically target these two paragraphs by specifying the p tags inside of the social media div or the social media ID. So I can come in here and type social media space p. So I'm saying target any paragraph tags that are inside of the social media div. And I want to make the font color white. I actually want to do a couple other things. I want to specify the font size here as 11 pixels, make it just a little bit bigger than the default. And I also want to space things out a little bit. So I'm going to go ahead and say margin 4 pixels top, 10 pixels from the right. I keep typing a semicolon there. 4 pixels from the bottom and 0 pixels on the left. So we'll specify a couple more things there. And when we go ahead and look back at our design, you can now see that information that's there. Now we also need to make these icons a little bit smaller. So I'm going to come in here, and again, I'm going to target these by saying social media. So I'm looking in the social media div, and I'm saying IMG. And we're going to go ahead and specify the width and the height of these to be 24 pixels. So the width and the height of those images should be 24 pixels. And when we go ahead and look at this, there you go. You can see my icons have now been made smaller. And again, if Expression Web is not correctly showing this in design view, before you assume that you made a mistake, preview it in a browser and see how it looks there. And it may appear okay in a browser and still not appear correct inside of Expression Web. So again, Expression Web's design view here, it's a good tool, but it's not perfect. Now, the next thing that I want to go ahead and do is change these icons so that they're positioned lined up next to each other as opposed to being on top of each other. And remember, whenever things are stacked on top of each other, like list items, if you want them to appear side by side, you simply change the display property from whatever it is currently to inline. So I'm going to come back into my CSS here, and again I'm targeting an element inside of the social media div, and specifically I'm targeting list items that are inside of unordered lists. And I want to make the display property inline so that they're next to each other. And now let's go ahead and look at main here, and you can see again Expression Web's design view is not really doing this justice here. And again, you might think at this point, okay, I've messed something up because it's not being displayed correctly. But when I look at this in a browser, there you go. My icons appear, and they're also appearing nicely side by side. So the next thing that I need to go ahead and do here in my design is I need to make sure Fullerton always is over to the left and social media divs here is floated over to the right. So I need to change the positioning of this. And to accomplish that, I'm going to again use that float statement. I'm going to tell the logo here to float to the left, and I'm going to say this, tell the social media div to float to the right. Let's go ahead and close that out. Come back in here to Expression Web. And again, I'm going to target things in the social media. Actually, I'm sorry. We'll start off up here at the logo. And I want to go ahead and target that and float it to the left. We'll save that, and now let's look and see what we've got here. Well, we don't notice any difference with the logo, but you are going to notice that these elements floated up here into the space left over by this logo here. And remember, that's what float means. Float basically means sort of lift the element up and float it over to one side or other of the container that it's inside. In this case, it's the wrapper. And since we've sort of lifted it up and moved it over, that allows other things to flow into the space left over on the side of the element. Now, in this case, things are displaying here kind of funny. Let's look at this in a browser. And you can see that has floated up into this space right here. What we want this to do is we want this social media icons to go over to the right. So I'm going to go ahead and again come into my style sheet here, and in my social media div that I have right here, I'm going to go ahead and say float right. I'm just going to go ahead and push that on over. but I don't want it all the way over against the right edge. I don't want it to be pushed that far over. So I'm going to go ahead and use some margin here. I'm going to say 0 top, 0 or 10 on the right, 10 pixels on the right, 0 on the bottom, and 0 on the left. So we'll go ahead and save that and get rid of that extra line there. And now let's look and see, all right, now this is positioned a little bit better. You can see where the social media div has moved over. You can see that right-hand margin there. And again, even though Expression Web is not displaying this correctly, when I look at this in a browser, we'll test it in Internet Explorer this time, you can see things are being positioned correctly and things are spaced out the way we need them to be. So that's all we're going to go ahead and do right now for the top div that's right here, and also for the logo and the social media icons. In the next video, we're going to go ahead and format this top menu, this top navigation area right here. So I'll go ahead and see you in the next video.